Hi, this is Nathan. Welcome to the Wad Fam Chalk Pod.
Hello and welcome to the Wad Fam Chalk Pod. I'm Dylan Weaver.
And I'm Andrew Sabo.
And this week we are joined by a special guest,
Nathan Haverstick.
Woo!
Hi Nathan, welcome back.
Hey boys.
This is your second episode appearing as a guest. You were our first guest.
Woohoo.
The people hear you most every week doing our intro and outro.
Indeed they do. My voice sounds probably different right now.
I don't know. Let us know in the comments.
No, it's true. It's less expressive. I've noticed that there's a lot of emotion in your voice during those intros and outros.
Well, I mean, I try to make everything as well enunciated and clear as possible, so I suppose
And we
makes you the
appreciate
best.
you for it.
Yeah.
That's why you get paid the big bucks.
Friendship.
What episode are we talking about today, Dylan?
We are talking about episode 164, Sixties-Something.
That we
That's
are.
60s-something.
Hey.
Oh boy.
This one's a lot, guys. Like,
Yeah.
I haven't listened to Odyssey since the last episode I was on, and
Since the Popsicle Kid.
since the Popsicle Kid, which was significantly less
Emotionally
annoying
jarring.
than this one. I don't know.
Popsicle Cabrera, the weirdest kid in town.
Yeah, that one felt more like an episode of Odyssey that I remember from my childhood. This one feels like something I erased.
Right. So, like, my history with this episode is that I don't think I ever heard it as a kid, or I just never thought about it again after hearing it. And then a couple years ago, when I was going through an archive of Odyssey episodes, saw this title and was like, oh boy, what could this be? And so I gave it a listen, and it has not left my mind in like the 2 years since.
Yeah.
So now we're doing an episode on it.
Yeah.
Sorry, everyone.
It's, this is going to be a modesty is the best policy type situation.
Another one of those.
Yeah.
I'm expecting it. I've been like doing scholarly research, so I don't sound like an idiot when I rip on this.
I have so
I'm
much
so
appreciation
proud of
for
you.
that. So the basic premise of this episode is that Odyssey is deciding to take down the 1960s in an episode that first aired August 24th of 1991, which is over 20 years after any year that started with a 6, and over 30 from 1960 itself.
Yeah.
Slightly late to the party.
It's
But-
written and directed by Paul McCusker, who was born in 58, meaning he was a child in the 60s.
All right, I did
So what
peek
we're
there.
getting here is what his parents told him about the 60s and what his conservative upbringing told him, right?
That is literally the extent of it. That's all it sounds like. Like there's not an argument outside of the central. Well, this seems bad.
Yeah.
Well, there's just this idea that like I don't quite understand what this episode about the 60s is mad at, right? So if they're mad at the drugs,
Precisely.
then like
Thank you.
Like, if they're mad at the drugs are not a 60s exclusive thing. Maybe that was a predominant culture, and if you want to live in a world where you believe that drugs didn't exist before that and didn't exist after that, you're just wrong. So, like, that's fine. But,
To tell them exactly how wrong they are, Andrew. Drug use peaked in 1981. That's both cocaine and marijuana and LSD peaked well after the 60s.
yeah. Yeah.
Yep. It is.
But it was during Reagan, so, like, we don't care.
I just like I want to know whose idea
That's not even
this
true. I don't know
episode
if Reagan was president.
He was president in the 80s.
Yeah.
Just all of them. But like, I have to know if, like, I don't know how Odyssey was being written, especially, you know, at this time, which is like their second or third year of doing the show. Like, did Paul McCusker just have this idea on his own? Or did it come up in a writer's room? Or did, like, Focus come and say, like, hey, man, do this? Because the thing is, I'm usually pretty good with Paul McCusker episodes.
Yeah.
He and I get along well enough.
Yeah. I
And,
would
like,
definitely agree.
There are always exceptions to that. I mean, he did also do modesty is the best policy. So, like, he's not a man without fault by any means. But I don't quite get what the point is. Is like, was the conversation, we want to condemn drugs, so let's make an episode about the 60s? Or was it, it's the 90s, and kids these days are looking back on the 60s fondly. We need to correct that. Like, this episode.
And the
Which
things that they like attack about the 60s are very sporadic.
And not
like it
like
seems at the beginning like, all right, this is an episode about like drugs. And then like the band that Rathbone hires fails because of alcohol. And then like so many other problems that come from not drug things are like the things that are bad about this episode, you know?
Yeah, well, and also, like, the things that they pick at about the 60s, I'm like, what about the civil rights movement? And, like, you know, all of that, segregation, the Vietnam War, those weren't great, and Odyssey does talk about it, but they talk about it negatively, saying that there's a guy who ran away because he didn't want to fight in a war, which I get it.
Yeah,
I don't want to fight in the war either. Like
Wit's because Wit's son Jerry was in Vietnam, and Plato, his friend, rows a boat across to Canada to escape the draft.
Yep.
That's an episode we will probably never talk about.
Yeah, no, but like, I just don't understand what their beef is. I get the general concept, and there are parts of it that I think are redeeming. From a Christian perspective, I understand how you could look at a movement that is purely human-centered in efforts to make increasing peace, love, and prosperity as something that's like, oh, this is a vain effort that's only going to blow up in their face. And, like, I get how you could look at that, but I'm also coming at it from a place of, I don't feel comfortable telling anybody who's trying to make peace, like, without, like hurting anybody, that's a wrong thing. Like, if you're promoting, you know, diversity and love and peace and equality, like, I'm not sure what God you worship, and I'm not entirely sure that I care, because I just think that those things are good, and I think that they're emblematic of a god.
And they're kind of counter to Wit's character throughout the rest of this thing, right? He's supposed to be sort of the champion for love, and I suppose maybe Focus on the Family only makes him the champion for love from God or to God, but I don't know. It feels weird hearing opinions like that from Wit.
Yeah. You know what? Let's roll the promo so we can get into the body of this episode.
Yeah, let's
because
do it.
I've got strong feelings about a lot of Wit stuff in this one. So let's see how Focus marketed this show in 1991.
Morning, dudes!
It's love, beads, and flower power.
Hey, peace, man.
On the next adventure in Odyssey,
Be cool and twist and shout.
Bart Rathbone
I am hip.
launches a return to the 60s movement.
Yeah, like groovy, man.
But is it really groovy?
So much for the 60s.
Next on Adventures in Odyssey.
So I don't think an Odyssey promo has ever sold us solely on the character of Bart Rathbone before.
Yeah.
But I love that it's all just from his perspective. Because he's such a bit player in the episode.
Yeah, okay, because that is a question that I had after listening to this. I was like, I don't remember Rathbone being much of a character in my, looking back on my 10-year-old listening to Odyssey phase, but does he, what is he? What does he do?
He runs to the Electric Palace. He runs for mayor at one point. He gets involved with Blackguard and stuff. But yeah, he basically runs their version of a Best Buy.
He is the small town liberal villain.
Yep.
Okay.
He's got the energy of a used car salesman.
I gathered
that. He's always trying to make a buck and rip someone off.
Okay.
And he's the closest thing Odyssey has to a normal person who is consistently a bad guy.
All right.
I guess Crime Brian Dern's maybe the other one who kind of falls into that camp. But most of the villains are not feel like they're out of a comic book, and Bart's like, oh yeah, he's that sleazy guy in your town who everyone hates.
Okay. I'm glad that everybody's supposed to hate him.
Also, his son is Rodney Rathbone.
I did.
Leader of the Bones of Wrath.
I did know that connection, yes.
Namer of Popsicle Cabrera. The weirdest kid in town.
Legends from that family, apparently.
Clearly. So so this episode that will become a condemnation of drug use, maybe above all else, starts with Chris and then Whit making fun of fashion.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the strangest part of this for me.
And I would say that the really interesting thing is, so I get it looking back, oh man, look at those crazy, that's definitely, this was in the 90s, and I think that's what we have to remember, but it's really funny to listen to it now because there is such a resurgence in 70s culture amongst a lot of young people, at least in my area. I don't know.
Yeah,
and
fashion
60s and 70s,
back.
Nobody looks at that fashion and thinks, yeah, they look stupid.
Well, apparently.
That's not true.
I mean,
that's not true. That's a generalization. I will go.
Yeah.
Oh.
I'm happy to call people stupid. I just think it's weird that it's the focus of the episode. Because Chris is her whole thing at the beginning is back in the 60s, the style and the attitudes were all pretty wacky.
I love that word.
Well, and the attitude that this episode takes towards it is that they're the moral authority on this, and the ideology of the 60s is just incredibly out of touch with reality. The music, the artists, all this stuff, all the drugs, they were just out there, and maybe they had good ideas and maybe they had bad ideas, but they were just, they were on another planet. They were ridiculous. I mean, look at their clothes.
Yeah, and they cite, Whit says, and I'm sure we'll get to this later, but he says something about, living without consequences, or maybe it's Jim towards the end. And it's well, they did live without consequences, maybe because, there was a potential future in which the world stopped the next day. There was an actual threat of imminent destruction for their entire childhood. Well, I'm talking more about, boomer generation, born right after World War II.
Yep.
And I think being unable to empathize with that emotion is one of the cornerstones that make this episode quite misleading and a bit manipulative.
And fair enough. So the episode begins with Connie running into Whit's End and screaming at him to come out and watch the Remember the 60s parade.
Yeah.
And Whit launches into not only the most preachy he's ever been at his first scene, but also one of the most preachy things he's ever done, period. It is astounding how hot out the gate he comes in this episode.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If he's a surrogate for Focus on the Family and whatever, and the writing of this episode, they look at it it's just stupid. Completely worthless and unintelligent.
It's very belittling.
Yeah, I'm wow! I mean, I get it. Like, there were some bad things. There was a lot of bad things, but wow.
Yeah, and I guess it's also important for us to point out from our end, unless Nathan's hiding something that I don't know about, none of us were alive during the 60s, or even, like, 91 when this episode aired. So, like, know that we are coming at this from decades upon decades of removal.
To be fair,
but also
so is Focus on the Family.
That was what I was gonna say. Oh my word.
Yeah, it's special.
Yeah.
And Wit goes on about 60s fashion, because we got to get that out of the way of the gate. Like, they just look stupid with the headbands and the everythings and the.
Oh my word.
And then Bart busts in a what I can only presume to be. I don't even know how to put the words to what I'm imagining Bart Rathbone looks like in this scene.
Well, he's got
A chickadillic headband.
Yeah, a chickadillic.
a paisley shirt, a turtleneck,
Yep.
and a chickadillic headband, and Wade is not having this.
I don't own any bell bottoms, but I do own all the rest of that.
Oh man. So right. The idea is that Rathbone's electric castle and rock and roll implements of destruction is throwing on a 60s week, complete with a concert at the end. And it's all just some racket for Bart to make money, because that's why Bart does anything.
Yeah, they're selling guitars and amps and stuff at the Electric Palace, and Soki's promoting 60s rock and 60s culture to get people to buy stuff.
There's no way Bart makes money off of this. Like, even before things fall apart at the end. Like, there's no chance.
I guess the question that I have is that, like, I know in the 80s there was a lot of fascination with the 50s, and, like, my mom grew up going to, like, 50s diners and stuff like that.
Right,
Like, what was there that for the 60s and the 90s or the end of the 80s? Like, was there that too? Was there something like that just didn't really even stick around at all?
I have to assume so, because, like...
Yeah, otherwise this makes less sense.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, if you think about just, like, living in the 2010s, it's all about early 90s nostalgia, right? That's the cornerstone right now, and so... It appears to be about 20, 30 years that people just start being nostalgic for things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah,
we solved it.
Yeah. We did, if the 80s were the 50s and the 90s were the 60s and, 2010s, we got Stranger Things, we went back to the 80s, and now we're living in the 90s. It's just, 30 years.
Yeah, every 30 years you get a...
Mission solved.
You get the... You get the nostalgia, and every 60 years you get a social justice movement. Like, it's how it goes.
Dude, that means that, like, in 10 years we get to experience 2000s nostalgia? Because I'm here for that.
Yeah.
I'm in. Build-A-Bear Workshop. That's
my
that's
gosh,
what I'm
let's
looking
get
forward to.
Yo, I'm waiting for Webkins to get cool again.
Oh, snap.
Wit hates the 60s. So, to establish some timeline stuff...
Oh, Wit roasts Bart's outfit and suggests he found it in a dump.
I would like to
add that.
Yep. Yeah. So Wit fought in World War II.
Yes.
Then went to college. So you have to, like, doing some timeline math and whatnot, which is always dangerous in Odyssey, but this is Odyssey.
Yeah, Wit would be roughly 100 years old.
Yeah, we don't need to talk about that. But, like, he's probably, like, mid-30s when, like, the 60s begin.
So just the right age to be mad at young people is what you're saying?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is exactly the point I am trying to make.
Okay.
Is unlike the writer of this episode, Wit is at the perfect age to hate the 60s.
Yeah. Especially, and I get it, because, like, the chances that characteristics from Wit were inspired by Paul McCuster's, like, father or something like that is not far-fetched.
No, it's not. And we get we get Bart reminiscing about back in that wonderful decade, to which Winter interjects, of turmoil and riots.
You know what? This is one of the things from Wit that I'm like, all right, he said the right thing this episode. He did the right thing. And just sort of no longer, I don't know.
It's that not like sugarcoating the past.
Yeah, they spend most of this episode not mentioning anything else about the 60s, and that's the closest they get.
Yeah,
It's the one time he mentions something other than drugs.
was so insignificant, I literally didn't catch it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The word Vietnam does not appear once in their 25-minute discussion of 1960s.
Yeah. I don't know. It also it has to feel like a bit of a condemnation of, like, I don't know, the turmoil and riots. I'm like, are you talking about like protests and like civil justice movements? Because then, like, yeah, like, I maybe don't like you throwing that as turmoil and riots, but I'm also not denying the fact that, you know, riots happen. So
yeah, well,
so you're, yeah, like we can look at the past and be like, yeah, it wasn't all great. I'm okay with that. The point of this episode is not to say the 60s were a perfect time.
No, that, I guess and as we mentioned before, like the biggest like point of disconnection for me is like I get it that they don't like drugs, but why is it about the 60s? And like then what
we have the
they
cocaine
like?
80s.
Yeah, there's
You're
so
just
much
coming out of the cocaine 80s.
Yeah.
Your audience is more scared of cocaine right now. Why are we
And he
mining?
makes a joke about cocaine is involved later.
Yes,
with
it is.
Kid that was Connie's age or younger, presumably.
Right.
Which this
That
is
kid's
album
your
9,
age.
meaning this kid is like 20?
What? No, this is album 14.
Oh, 14.
Last week's episode was album 9, I think. Could be wrong.
So how old is Connie? Because that changes maybe
High
some
school.
Of, high school? Okay.
High school. She doesn't graduate high school for another, like, 10 years.
All right, I'm tracking.
Yeah. So in Bart's continuing to reminisce about the 60s, he brings up Sergeant Packard's Lovely Hats Club band.
I'm so glad you wrote that down, too.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Best joke of the episode.
When I heard it at first, I thought he said Hewlett Packards. I was like,
Well, this
That's
isn't
even
very
better.
funny.
Hewlett Packard's Lonely Hats Club band, and I was dying.
Oh no! It's the Lovely Hats Club band.
Oh, I missed that part.
Yeah, which is both. It's a funny joke because Bart, like, the whole crux of this episode is that Bart also doesn't remember the 60s.
Yeah.
For
Like,
different reasons? Question mark.
Like, his whole thing is that he's just trying to, like, scam people out of their money. And so it's great because you can play that off as he doesn't know the name of a Beatles album, but you can also not have to directly reference a Beatles album. Which I don't know what the copyright issues would be on that, but, like, the Beatles are protective.
Odyssey tends to make it very clear what they're referencing without actually saying the name when it comes to rock and roll artists. Because I remember there were episodes where they were, like, playing a guitar riff that sounded, like, exactly like Smoke on the Water, but with just a couple different chords.
I mean, you gotta do something.
Yeah,
Which,
exactly.
Actually, speaking of which, my favorite thing about this episode is the John Campbell score.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
I was gonna comment on the
killing
music
it.
at some point.
It's so good.
It's a lot better
And
than most episodes of Odyssey.
It's so ridiculous to be condemning the 60s while at the same time doing these amazing send-ups of, like, 60s style music throughout the episode.
Yeah, it's lovely. It feels like, I say this about everything, but it feels like Twin Peaks at some point, with, like, the weird fusion of blues and folk and, you know, disco and stuff.
It's really good.
it is quite nice.
Yeah.
It breaks it up pretty well.
So then we get Connie going to the library to research the 60s. We get the really good score we were talking about. And the scene opens up with the librarian going, 60s! Yeah, we got information on the 60s.
Hello, I, the librarian, have information about the 60s at the library. Thank you, Connie, for coming to the library.
To find information about the 60s.
About the 60s.
Yeah.
And I did have, like, a small question, because she picks out the book by Josh Guthrie, obviously. And this is another thing where Odyssey references pop culture without referencing pop culture. Is there, like, a specific author or book that they're trying to make a very explicit reference to that I just don't get?
I don't think it's a very explicit reference. I mean, the fact that his name is Josh Guthrie did make me think, is this intentionally an Arlo Guthrie thing? Like, I think it is.
Yep.
But I don't know. Right. I don't know if this book is a direct, like, parallel to a book that existed or was just, like, an attempt to be like, yeah, here are some things that people thought back then.
Yeah, no, it's just a plot device, I think, to convey how they were thinking. And the idea that, like, how could you get Connie to be interested in it? Like, of course, give her a book. Okay. There you go.
Yeah. Well, having fun isn't hard.
I'm so glad you thought that, too, because I thought that when I was listening to the episode.
So, yeah.
So she researches it, she reads this, she reads The Prism of Change, and honestly, like, she reads the poem out loud. And so the audience
really
gets
lovely.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
It's a good poem.
Change through the weakness of a lasting love. That's the thing I highlighted from it.
Yeah.
I love that line. I love that idea.
Yeah.
It was, yeah. It's one of the other weird things about this episode, similar to the comment I just made about the music, where it's like, oh,
You're doing a great job of
You
selling the
could've-
60s.
right, like you could have just like trashed this thing, but instead the move could have been like, let's just make this sound as bad as possible. But then they like went and made stuff that like sounds good.
Well,
It's
I don't know.
and maybe it
getting
was
information
accidental and
from-
unintentional, and maybe we're removed enough from the culture that that's just what we take from it. Because I have no idea what it would have been like to be, in Focus on the Family's receiving audience in 1991 and, like, be in that culture. Like, I don't know. I don't know anything about that. It's really hard because for me, every time, like, I listened to this, I think maybe a couple months ago, and that's when I really started pestering Dylan about it, because I wanted to cover it.
Yep.
And I was like, yeah, I just kind of like this 60s, and what they're saying isn't really that bad. There's a lot of bad about the 60s that they just don't really talk about much, and I don't get what why.
I don't know. We're getting information from like 3 sources because Connie's, I guess, are the audience surrogate for most of this episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we seem to be getting negative responses to the 60s from old people, Wit and this Jim fellow. And we seem to be getting quite positive responses to it from every other corner of the environment. And it paints this really strange, I don't know.
I don't know if I fully agree with that. Like, the thing that's weird is that, like, only Connie seems to be, like Bart is fake into it.
True.
The band he hires is not at all interested. Wit is not. The people, like, at the hotel, like, there aren't that many characters in this. Mm-hmm. And it would be interested to see, like, other people get swept up in it. Because it feels like Connie is swept up in it, like, from a distance to some extent.
True.
And, like she in the beginning of the episode is, like, interested in the 60s very abstractly. And then Wit says, hey, maybe you shouldn't be. And then she goes to the library and gets really into the 60s, and then goes and talks to Jim and eventually gets, like, out of being into the 60s.
Get scared straight.
Right. But we don't actually see... Yeah, we'll get into it.
We'll talk about the fear-mongering later.
But, like, we don't see... I don't know. It doesn't feel like, oh, the whole town is getting swept up in this. Like, even like a classic Odyssey interstitial of like a newscast, like cut to Link Wainwright talking about the parade or something. Just like something so it doesn't feel like, oh, this is just a thing that like Connie is feeling.
Yeah, no, I think that it's very... I mean, that's just how the episode is written, but I feel like what I think Odyssey does a lot is they pick an ideology that's basing this around, like, okay, so don't romanticize something if you don't fully understand it, because there's probably more to what they're saying, or more to what's going on than what they're saying. Like, if we could just take a step back, like, completely objectively, that's what they're saying. Don't romanticize the 60s because there was a lot of bad, and what you think was good was actually bad, and whatever, which is great. But why would you target something that is so hard to target? Like, what do they have to gain from that?
Right. I think the episode lacks a focus and therefore just feels like old man yells at cloud.
Yeah. That's what it all boils down to.
If it felt like they were making points, I would feel very differently. But because it feels like we're just like, it's just a general condemnation of a 10-year period of time without, like, much support. And with just saying, like, the thing that constantly gets said by Wit even throughout the episode and by Jim is just like oh yeah, there were some good things, but in reality, it has ruined our way of life.
Yeah, and
I'm
think
just
that it's
like...
emblematic
can
of like
you...
a flawed way of thinking, like that
Well,
you can place sole blame like that.
Yeah, well, and the episode's even kind of towards the end tries to reckon with that and be like, look, it's not like I don't blame the 60s, I blame myself. And it's like, then why does this episode exist?
Exactly. Yeah. That is my biggest my biggest beef. It's just like, he says, I don't blame the 60s, I blame myself. And you're like, oh, so you blame the 60s for making you be something that you weren't. And that's what's bad about it? We're going to blame that 10-year period of time that wasn't just, I don't know, you losing track a little bit during very formative years in your life?
Right. But, like, if the episode is, if our, like, somewhat, like, not, I don't know, if the kind of protagonist of the episode is saying, like, no, I don't blame the 60s, then why'd you make an episode condemning the 60s, Odyssey?
Yeah, it would, you could literally just change the title. This one's about drugs, guys, and then I'd be like, okay, I guess that's mostly fine. But they don't do that. They keep going after, like we said, the 10-year period of history.
Yeah, no, my first note for this episode is, it's time to talk crap on an entire decade.
Yeah. Yep. There was some good. We're not going to talk about that or even allude to what it was, but it wasn't all bad. However, don't talk about it because it all was bad.
Yeah, and we're only going to talk about the bad in an extreme vacuum, blind to everything else previous.
Yeah, this is a author that's from Odyssey, which is, like, I want to continue on with the episode a little bit. So,
yeah, no,
Josh
fair.
Guthrie is from Odyssey, which is nuts. And he was, like, apparently very popular, maybe at least in Odyssey. We don't know if we're talking worldwide. I'm getting the idea that this guy's a big deal, from later in the episode. But whatever. And, yeah, he wrote some good stuff. And then we get Wit and Bart. And Bart's talking to Wit, trying to get him to, one, kind of get into the spirit of things, and two, to sell ice cream at his concert on Saturday. And Wit
to rename
is a jerk.
No, Bart specifically wants him to rename his lime sherbet to Dayglow Delight.
What is Dayglow?
Dayglow is neon.
Oh. Why?
Well, I don't know, but that prompts Wit's other spot of wokeness.
Yeah.
The old, it's not progressive to change the name of my ice cream if I don't believe it or something like that.
Yes. Yeah. Where he's like, I'm not gonna change my ice cream just to get into the spirit of things with like when I don't endorse the rest of it.
Yeah, I like that one too. Another good Wit jab.
Yeah.
He's definitely jabbing.
Everywhere it seems. Jabbing everyone.
Yeah, and then Bart explains that he's got the gyroscopes for Saturday's concert.
Boy,
a band
what
that
an
he
awesome name.
What?
a band that he has never heard of.
Yeah.
And then we get the best Bart line maybe ever.
Oh boy.
Where he says to Wit, "Man, you are so unhip, it's a wonder you don't walk sideways."
Yep.
Yeah, I might use that in my life at some point. I think that
It's
would be
one
fun.
where I was like, shoot, is this a thing that, like, other people said? Like I was like, this is so good that I am almost convinced that it was just, like, part of pop culture that this was a thing people said, and it's not something Bart just came up with, because it sounds too good to be something that Bart just tossed off.
I mean, so is the Bones of Wrath.
Yeah, fair
Even
enough.
a blind squirrel finds a nut every now and again.
Oh, man.
Yeah, it's a certainly interesting scene, which is abruptly interrupted with Connie coming in and scaring Bart off with 60s philosophy.
Yeah.
Essentially. Connie comes in and starts talking about peace and love and stuff, and Bart's like, I don't know what you're talking about, so I'm leaving.
She's got strong, I'm in college and I just read a book for the first time energy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Doesn't she kind of always though?
Yeah.
Isn't that a bit
yeah.
the point? Yeah. Yeah.
It's in character, but it's just this thing of like her spouting off about philosophy, just like
As young
but yeah.
people talking about things, I'm wondering, though, if I'm going to look back on my life and see a lot of similarities between me at times and Connie at times. So, like,
Oh, you mean like
Absolutely.
I mean, Andrew, I think that's what this podcast
You
is.
record
Yeah.
yourself talking a lot, Andrew. You're not gonna like it in 20 years.
No, yeah. But, like, I'm going to see a lot of Connie, necessarily getting caught up in things.
Yeah. Sort of naive fervor for new ideas. And
Yeah.
there's nothing abnormal about that.
Or I
But-
think objectively wrong, as long as you become educated.
Yeah, it's just a thing of moderation and, getting information from as many sources as possible. But Wit pushes back pretty hard on young Connie here.
Yeah, he doesn't really feel like there's much room for interpretation or difference of opinion there.
No, it's
No.
a real I'm right and you're not kind of situation.
I know, and it's tough because Connie's big thing is like, what's wrong with like sharing with those in need and working towards peace in the world and that stuff. And Wit's response is to be like, oh yeah, that stuff would be nice, but it's not gonna happen.
Yeah.
Without
Which is-
Jesus.
Yeah, and that
without
brings
Jesus
us back
Christ.
to kind of what Andrew started with was like the, is if there's like human-based improvement in the world, does God like that? Does God not like that? And I agree with Andrew shockingly that, humans being nice to each other doesn't seem like a negative thing.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
and I would
Hot
say
take.
that like confining the will of God to what you consciously do is a dangerous game. Like, do you know how infinite of a being he is and how finite your brains are, and like the idea that, I don't know, you think that you've got God figured out enough that you can determine between what piece is good piece and what piece is bad piece? Like,
Yeah. No, that is a very fair point, because it does feel like this thing where it's like, I don't like, no one in the episode is like, Connie doesn't even it's not like she's like, oh, we can achieve like utopia without God. Like, that's not the point that's being made.
It's not a Tower of Babel situation. Like,
right.
We're not doing that. We're just like, hey, wait a minute. What if
we didn't go to war with Vietnam?
African American people ride at the back of the bus. Always. It's like, we're just gonna start with basic human decency here.
That's the floor. Like, that's not the ceiling. That's the floor, guys.
Right. Just like, why are you? I don't know. Like, Wit's got this strong energy that's just frustrating. Of like, like, if basically his stance is like, if we can't fix things 100%, why do it at all? Like, he's like, well, without God, we can't solve any of this stuff, so let's not try.
Wit's starting to sound like the American left.
And it's...
Whoa.
I'm gonna leave the rest of my neoliberal stuff away. But...
No, I'm interested.
Just be careful there. You don't want Focus to think... that
I don't want Focus on the Family from Colorado Springs coming for me.
No, you do not. Focus on the Family. Stay away from Nathan. He's a good guy.
I'll put that in my resume, Dylan.
LinkedIn.
Dylan Weaver, host of the Wad Fam Shock Pod, said that I'm a, quote, nice guy, unquote.
Your name carries a lot of weight in the internet, Dylan. You got a lot of fingers and a lot of pies,
Yeah.
You only got 10 fingers.
All of them are in a pie, Andrew.
That's fair.
They're each in different pies. It's very hard. I had to get a
small
lot of
pies.
like small pies. Dang it, Andrew, don't step on my jokes. So, yeah.
Where were we in the chronology of this one?
Josh Guthrie works at a halfway house.
Right. So after roasting, yes. After roasting Connie, Wit's like, okay, you can go, like, Josh Guthrie is actually from around here, and he is in Connellsville and at this drug rehab house. And Connie's like, all right, I'm going to go track him down. And then she does not quite. We cut to a scene of her meeting with the director of the halfway house, Jim Reeves, who is extremely cagey and about trying to find Josh Guthrie, and then hostile. Yeah. This dude is horrible to her.
No, he's a jerk.
He's pretty nasty.
So Connie was impressed with what he wrote, and she's like, they're having this interaction, and Connie quickly kind of learns that she's actually talking to Josh Guthrie, even though she's talking to Jim Reeves. But he's just mean to her. And this idea that Josh Guthrie looks back at this entire decade and, like, what the audience is aware of his body of work is only the poem that was shared, and then what he tells about his life after that. And so, like, he's talking about kind of the life he lived, I guess that's later. Is when he really opens up.
He really doesn't. Not much happens in this sequence other than him being mad at Connie.
Yeah,
and it seems like he seems to insinuate that, he's trying to be reclusive and like people constantly try and find him, and what possible purpose could they have, or what purpose could he have for being mad at people who enjoyed his work?
I guess he just must. I mean, I guess the narrative is he was in a halfway house, so he probably had a really long... I mean, what does he say, like 5 years?
Yeah. He says he was...
strung out for 5 years, something like that.
On probably just weed. If this is Odyssey. I'm not thinking they're...
Yes, strung out on weed. That's what
we don't know.
What?
There's a high schooler addicted to cocaine.
Yeah. We don't know.
That can happen.
But right. So it's this thing of like it's a oh, this is the dumbest analogy. But the move he's doing is very Yoda in Empire Strikes Back. When when Luke shows up on Dagobah and is like asking about Yoda, and Yoda's being all coy and being like, "Oh, I'll have to take you to him." And like, this is just the mean version of that, where he's like, "No, Josh Guthrie never wants to see anyone again. He might as well be dead." Like,
yeah, Josh Guthrie hates you and everybody like you.
And also has no wisdom for you. I will not help you.
No.
Yeah. And small props to this episode in that Connie, when she exits, says, "Bye, Mr. Guthrie." Like, she puts it together. And a worse and typical episode of Odyssey would have just been like, yeah, Connie doesn't figure that out.
No, as an audience
Like-
surrogate, Connie is amazing. Like, this is one of the best Connie episodes I feel like we've covered.
Like, she's so on top of it, and actually like cracks the code.
Yeah.
Figures out like that this is Josh, and without it being horribly telegraphed.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
She
it's one of
figures it
those
out
things-
faster than I did.
Okay, that's what I was gonna ask. It's one of those things for me where I'm like, I'm listening to the episode and I'm like, okay, so this guy is probably Josh Guthrie, but like, even I am not confident enough to just call him Mr. Guthrie. And then Connie does it, and I'm like, oh, rock on, Connie! Like, way to actually like put together some clues and like be a person.
Yeah. They gave
I
her
wish
a brain.
it wasn't so rare. And her big thing is just like, she wants people of her generation to know what, like, to know what this book said, because she read it and it was so impactful to her. And she's like, I think other people could gain value from this. And Jim/Josh is just like, no, not possible. Everything I did in the past was horrible because it ended up just wrecking me on drugs.
Which seems counter to the thesis of the episode. Which
And
is
what
like,
he was saying.
Yeah,
Like,
you
I
can,
would
you
say
can
that
harvest beauty from things that are not good. But not in this case, because drugs, right?
Well, and also, like, drugs, like, addiction is always bad, right?
Yep.
Like,
I there are a few times that the views of Andrew Acebo align with the views of the Wad Fam Chalk Pod. I think this is one where
Yeah.
I'm comfortable saying that.
yeah. Like, addiction.
Thumbs down to addiction.
Yeah, he views everything so negatively because, like, he was addicted to it. But, like, that is the bad part, not the philosophy, right? Like, how... So, if you're addicted, it's a sickness. It's destructive. If you were addicted for 5 years, that would basically tear your life apart. It's true. And I get that. But there is no part about peace and love and flower power involved in that. I mean, maybe you thought that you were justified, but, like, when you stole your mom's, laptop to sell it for drugs, like, that, there's no part of peace, love, and flower power in there,
Yeah. The
So
philosophy
how can
of
you
the
hold it to, like, how can you hold this philosophy accountable for actions that are so clearly not rooted in this philosophy?
Right.
Because they all have the common denominator of the 60s.
Ah. Thank
Yeah.
goodness I figured out
You
the
forgot
episode.
the thesis of the episode. 60s bad, Odyssey good.
You know what? I believe it. I'm in.
Honestly, they do make a
That
pretty
that
convincing
that
argument.
line makes Andrew become a Christian.
Yeah.
They convinced me.
So yeah. Oh, and he asks on the way out, I don't know, she says something about like going back to work or something, and he's like, oh, where do you work? She's like, Wits End in Odyssey, and he's like, okay, storing that away for later so I can come in at the perfect moment.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that. So we get Bart the gyroscopes. They're ugly. At least in Bart's eyes.
Well, they're normal dudes who don't.
Yeah,
dress in-
that's the thing, is they just look like normal guys in like jeans and a t-shirt, and he was expecting hippies.
And he's gonna drive him in the station wagon that he presumably painted.
He painted flowers on it.
With,
Yeah,
like,
it's not presumably.
window paint is my guess. I don't know.
I was
I
thinking
don't
like
know.
the wood panels on the side there. That's
Yeah,
really what I
it's-
was hoping.
Oh, that's like a
Oh,
permanent installation.
Oh yeah.
Bart's all bought in.
That's fair.
He said that he was going to get them a limo, but figured with them being all down to earth that they'd probably be embarrassed by that. So he just got a station wagon and painted it with flowers. And it's a fun little scene. The band, the two members we hear from, Grace and
Mark.
Mark and Grace are the two people. Will Ryan is playing Mark. Dave Arnold is playing Grace. Will Ryan as Mark was pretty delightful. I always enjoy hearing Will Ryan doing a voice.
He's quite delightful. He does a good job. And I feel bad because I feel like we've been really riding this episode pretty hard. But like,
Yeah, but it's not good.
No,
it's not
no,
good.
I stand by my writing this. You
no,
know?
no, it's not. I'm not saying that it's good, but I'm saying that there are redeeming qualities in the sense that like, I do want to make sure that like, yeah, the fact that this is a good Connie episode is really great. And I understand where they're coming at this from. I just think that they did it wrong.
Very poor execution.
Yeah.
If we're
But-
correct about our guess to their intent, their intent
Yeah.
might be totally different from what we're expecting. Or
Right,
we're,
it's
proposing
yeah.
here,
Well,
but-
and I looked at the theme of the episode, which I'm pretty sure is love or
No,
something.
so-
God's
the-
nature, drug use, peace.
Oh,
Correct.
there it is.
Are the listed themes. Oh, I scoured both the official guide and the complete guide to try and find any anecdotes about this episode. Well, I didn't get a single one. The show was not talking about it in either book, which I was like, maybe there's a recognition that like, we shouldn't be so hyped on this episode. And then I realized that they aired it last summer, so like
Yeah,
Maybe
no, it's
not.
not out of rotation.
I don't know if this is uncommon, but according to the AIO wiki, this is the only episode tagged with the theme of God's nature.
Yeah, a lot of those themes are just kind of weird one-off things.
Okay.
So that's not out of the ordinary.
I'm
Kinda
curious to
funny,
see
though.
what the themes for drug use episodes are.
There's only one more.
Is it is it what that episode of the Twilight Zone with the
the
chicken?
chickens.
Yeah, Twilight Zone 288. You're right.
Oh, that one is just called Twilight Zone?
Yeah.
Yeah. We covered that one on the show. Go listen to that episode, people. That was fun.
The chickens.
Oh my word. They have a toy chicken that talks as the metaphor for drugs.
How does that play out?
They sit in a circle
Really
and pass around a
delightfully.
toy chicken that talks.
Oh,
It's so good. The chicken's name is Henny.
Yep.
all right.
So yeah. We then what? Oh, so right. Connie's back at Wit's End,
And Guthrie shows up.
and so Wit's like, all right, Connie, I've been trying to like beat around it all week. What's wrong?
This is the line that really makes me not be happy with how they did Wit in this episode. Like before, I was like, all right, I can kind of, excuse.
Do you have the
boomer
line written
philosophy,
down?
But he's very not nice to her.
Yes. Yeah. And then in walks Jim Reeves, aka Josh Guthrie.
Takes off his glasses. It's me.
Hey. And he's like, all right, Connie, I gotta take you on a trip. And she's like, drugs?
That
He's
was
like,
one
no.
of the cringier jokes.
yeah.
Because it's also like, he sounds sketchy when he says it. He does, he's like, I have something to show you. you'll have to take a trip with me. Like, it's bad both ways.
No, yeah, my note is getting in a car with a strange poet from the 60s who showed up out of nowhere is clearly a good idea.
Yeah, and I had to keep reminding myself that it's 91.
Yeah.
But, like, she even, like, turns to Wit to be like, is this okay? And Wit's like, yeah, I'll cover for you. And I was like, oh, you weren't asking, like, Wit's permission to go with some, like, strange man. You were asking if he would, like, cover your shift.
Also, what he does is take her back to a halfway house and does a scared straight on her.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, whoa! I feel like there should
Could've
be
done
better
that from
communication
afar,
about
maybe.
the distance is concerned, or where they're going. You know, I feel like if he had told Connie that he wanted to go at the halfway house and show, like, if he had given part of his spiel, like, one, Connie would have been able to emotionally prepare for it, and two, it would have just been way less creepy.
But also, she went and met him at the halfway house previously.
Yeah.
Why didn't he just do this then? What has changed in the story between her leaving and him coming to pick her up?
No, so basically what happens at the end of their first discussion is that Connie's like, do you have any wisdom? You know, there are people in my generation that have questions and they need your insight. And it's very much kind of you know, I retired, you know, I'm not a superhero anymore, whatever kind of moment. But instead it gets turned into, I was never really a superhero. I was just addicted to drugs.
Right, I know, but why didn't he do that all in one scene? Why did she have to go away?
Because he
and then
feels
he had
bad
to track her
about
down
them.
at her work.
He feels bad. That's the whole point.
But we felt like he felt bad in that scene, didn't we?
Yeah, well, the whole point is that, like, Connie asked a hypothetical about something that she wanted, and he said that he couldn't give it to her, and then he's felt bad about it because he was a jerk.
So he just had second thoughts.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah. I don't think that would be uncommon.
No.
Yeah, I don't know. It just felt like a weird plot.
It is a bit of a
where
180. And if there was, like, you know, a one-off scene of this guy monologuing in his office, it might make a little more sense, but I don't know that we need that.
Yeah, no, you're right. Anyways, so Jim just decides to now is his chance to monologue. And I think it's a really interesting move from the show to be like, okay, the guy who, like, finally sets Connie straight here is going to be someone who was involved in the drug culture of the 60s, wrote a book, has since, like, gotten clean, hates what he did, is still not a Christian or a particularly good or nice person, and now he's gonna be the one to, like, deliver the message to Connie and by an extension the audience. I just felt like it was an interesting move. He is so
Preachy.
Yeah, but not in a compassionate way.
No, he's basically saying, like, he sounds like he's mad. He
Right.
just sounds like he's mad. Like, get high and expand your mind. Like,
Yeah.
they're
Nobody
referencing it with
said
so
it would
much-
ruin my life.
so much sarcasm and so much just, like, yeah, like, there is so little validation for an entire 10-year period of people and philosophy that, like, yeah, it comes off strange. And, like, he makes the comment of, like, you know, the music, the culture, everybody was about, you know, like, everybody was just kind of living for the moment and not caring. And I understand that, but that, one, not very special to the 60s. Other things were special to the 60s that weren't that. I would argue that is a all of human history thing. And yeah, and two, like, okay, So if we want to talk bad about 60s music, like, the music didn't do necessarily anything bad. Maybe, you know, it romanticized it to young people that weren't aware, but at the end of the day, it's those people's responsibility, because whether it's music or it's something else, like, we all encounter things in our life. Like, you can't just blame a decade to avoid taking responsibility for, you know, throwing away 6 years of your life.
But, quote Jim Reeves, the upheaval of the 60s has everything to do with the problems we're dealing with now. Yeah. Doesn't that mean that one decade caused everything?
And nothing was bad before that. That's the important thing to remember.
Everything went wrong in 1959, and we're really suffering now.
I mean, this guy's your age, Connie. He's battling cocaine addiction. He didn't have anything to do with the 60s. He wasn't born then, so why the addiction? Because we said, if it feels good, do it. In the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, your generation and the generation to come is suffering the effects of that.
The general depravity of man really be out here, you know?
Yeah. Well, and the thing that's so unfortunate is, like, there is a very much America's identity was built in the 50s, post-World War II, when we had overcome the Great Depression and we, like, really stepped into our own as a global powerhouse. And, like, that's when the white picket fence, that's when McDonald's, like, that's when America was great. And then it just went right to the crapper in the 60s, and ever since then it's been bad. Like,
and we've been trying to get back to there ever since. Yeah, you know, how great the 50s was for straight white men and no one else.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff we could talk about.
Oh, there's so much. Yeah, and so so Jim's just going through this whole thing, talking about how, like, all of his ideas that Connie was looking up were wrong because he didn't actually make an impact on the world with them. In fact, he, like, made it worse. And I'm like, your ideas didn't make it worse. Like Andrew said earlier when we were talking about stuff, like, you have to separate the stuff you wrote from, like, the drugs you did. Like, those seem like two separate things, but he's convinced, like, they're the same.
Like, I love 70s funk music. Most of that was fueled by cocaine. I'm okay with that. I still don't like cocaine. I will never do cocaine. But I still like 70s funk music.
Right. We live in a fallen world. Everything was created by people who screwed up in some way.
Exactly.
I mean, I said that earlier. That's pretty much like imminent death. 1960s. Why not?
Right. Yeah, we're living under... Right. At any point, we're in the middle of the Cold War. At any point, bombs could go off and the world could be done.
Yeah.
Yay.
Anyway, so then we get Barton, the hotel manager, because the fan went to jail.
Wait, we cannot leave this scene quite yet, can we?
No, this is the meat of the episode, Andrew.
That's right, because this is it. He's like, because he's then talking about, you know, like his ideas, you know, they were wrong. They sounded good, made for nice poetry, but they didn't work. Not in this world, not with people the way they are. We failed, Connie. We didn't help the world. We didn't change anything.
Well, but wasn't the whole idea of his philosophy, like, slow, constant, personal-based change, like, you know, sort of...
No, if everything didn't change in a day, it failed. Like,
yeah, that seems pretty opposite to what he was saying in the book.
It's just... And this feels like... And Connie hits on it later, but, like, I guess... And maybe this is the point Odyssey is trying to make, is that Jim Reeves put his faith in humanity and in, like, the people of the world coming together to make it a better place, and those people failed him, and that's why he's in such rough shape, whereas God wouldn't fail in that way. Like, is maybe the point that Odyssey's trying to make?
No,
I feel like if you just said those words, that would make the point better than
Right. That's what I'm saying is.
And this Jim fella yelling for 10
No, the
minutes.
whole point that they're trying to make is that the absolute truth of God, as surrogated by wit, is that anything apart from God will fail. And what I'm saying, and what I think the issue we have with this episode is that you can do things that align with the character of God without knowing it. Like, I mean, Jesus makes that abundantly clear. You know, like anybody who takes care of the least of these, it's not confined to whether you recognize Yahweh. I'm not talking salvation. I'm not talking about anything like that. I'm just talking about what is good and what is bad. It's like, oh, if you're a nice Muslim, you're still a bad person. Like,
yeah, like it's right. It's that thing of like, it is impossible. Like the stance it feels like the show is taking is, without God, it is impossible to do good.
Total depravity of man, and that's.
And I think they ignore the fact that you can do partial good without like attaining the ultimate good that I suppose only comes from God.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And this is also
Odyssey
a time
seems
in
to,
which
like, not mention at all that, you know what? If you're a Christian, you already got the old the salvation, the ultimate good in your life from God. Why not sort of project that outwards? How about do some stuff, you know?
Yeah.
Right.
And there's very much an idea that, especially around mental health, in that era of Christianity, especially in that, demographic, it's just that it's not really real, that God is obviously the answer to all of your problems, and anything that you do needs to be consciously and directly oriented towards him for it to be not sinful and bad. And there's differences of opinions on that, and I would say that I differ.
Yeah, I don't know. This whole episode, like, the crux of this is hard to talk about, and I think part of it is there isn't a clear message from the episode, so it's hard to make a clear rebuttal.
Yeah. Exactly.
And so, like, I'm sure I'm going to be editing this and being like, ooh, I could have said that better. I don't really agree with the way I said that. Like, those sorts of things. But it's just because the episode is so enigmatic and is just being like, look, a period of time sucked.
Mm-hmm. So, this is what they call cultural encapsulation, which I literally just learned about in school, and it's the idea that you are so completely absorbed in one particular culture that you are completely in denial about the value of anything else, essentially, and that
Pretty
can
well
put on the
Christianity sometimes.
and that can put on the absolute truth in Christianity pretty well. If you don't model your life after Jesus, it's almost like that's what he's there for.
Yeah. So to close out the Jim Reeves monologue, where he's talking about not being able to help the world, he continues to say, in fact, we made it worse. We wanted freedom without responsibility, and now the consequences are 2 decades of a drug epidemic, abortion, AIDS, and people who only think about themselves. And I would say that the 60s are not responsible for that. Living in a fallen world is responsible for that.
Which he
and
mentions
also,
earlier, but doesn't mention as the reason for this. Right? He specifically says something earlier about how, like, definitely all of the evil didn't come from this, but
Right, but then continues to talk as though all the evil did come from this.
Well, and I would also then point to the context that we have now of our awareness of Big Pharma's role in the opioid epidemic.
Well, I mean, to be fair, we knew the war on drugs was a bad idea from the get-go.
Yeah,
and wouldn't
exactly.
work.
No. I'm not saying that, yeah, I'm not defending it by any means, but I'm saying that like that is a very clear example that listening to it in, the year of our Lord 2020, we can look at and be like, yeah, so really people are bad to people, and that sometimes looks like drugs, and sometimes it looks like other things.
That's it. Wrap it up, boys.
Disagree with that. And so, right. So then this is Connie saying, well, how can you blame the 60s, an entire decade, for our problems? And this is where Jim walks back and is like, well, look, the messaging of this episode, the whole way through to the title, is that the 60s suck. But actually, I blame myself because I am the 60s.
Whoa.
And now I am doing my recompense by running this clinic.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's the episode.
It doesn't get more clear towards the end.
No, yeah, then we get Bart and the hotel manager because the band goes to jail and Bart has to bail them out, and the whole thing is just
they were
driving
in a
them
bar all
going-
night, then they played loud music and trashed the room and beat up people who worked at the hotel, and so they were arrested, and Bart bails them out
Alcohol wasn't
just in
invented
time for a
1959.
concert that gets rained out.
Yep, and you get
God's
that whole
final smile down on
and
them.
Bart yells at them, "You ever heard of Lauren Welk? She's all what? She could play circles around you guys."
No, Lawrence.
Oh,
Lawrence
Lawrence.
Welk.
Lawrence.
He is a famous accordionist.
Is he?
Yes.
Wow.
Did you
Started
Google
in-
that? Or did you
Yes.
know that before?
No, I didn't know that before. No,
I couldn't be sure.
He started in the 30s. Continued to play accordion and sing, and had a television show all through all the way up to his death in the 90s, like a year after this episode came out. So yeah, that's just one of those fun times where it's like, oh yeah, we don't have to do a Sergeant Packard's thing. We can just straight up say it. Lawrence Welk. And also a fun connection because Rodney Rathbone, offspring of Bart, plays the accordion for the Bones of Wrath, the band.
A lot of connections.
So many connections.
There's no good spot for this, but it is moderately interesting that the voice actor for Jim Reeves is an actual psychologist.
Oh yeah, I did want to get into that.
And when we were talking about where the sort of, the impetus for this episode came from, that would be my guess.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, could be.
He sits on the board for Focus on the Family.
He's
or
like
something.
he was like the staff psychologist for Focus on the Family.
Yeah. So I would assume this was something.
Yeah, he pitched the episode.
Probably.
Yeah, I could buy that. That is that's Mr. Bill Meyer.
Yeah.
Voiced
Wow.
Josh Guthrie / Jim Reeves. What else? Oh, there's a little interaction with Connie and Whit where Connie's like, yeah, Jim kind of spoiled everything for me regarding, the 60s. I can no longer go out there and party and have a good time. And then she's like, it was really hard talking to him. I felt like he was still searching for something. I volunteered to go back there to spend time with, to help out at the house and hopefully have a chance to tell him about Jesus, which I was like, I think that was really well portrayed in the episode of
It's such a good Connie episode.
It is a good Connie episode. But he is so you get the idea that Jim is so mad at the world and truly hopeless.
Well, and it's true that when you invest in something and then you realize that investment, one, not only didn't turn out to be what you thought, but it took everything from you, it's pretty easy to be like, yeah, nah, nothing's good ever, especially if you don't have some sort of external form of hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just don't think they validate that in his character very well, or
No.
at least his lines.
No. Which
don't
is
think
all
they
the show
validate-
is.
You don't think they validate the hopelessness?
Well, I don't think they attribute the reason for his hopelessness as explicitly as.
Oh, no. But I think it's also, I don't know, it also feels like kind of a half-decent opportunity of Odyssey being like, we're not going to, like, over-telegraph this. Like, there isn't a scene where he's like, oh, man, I just wish there were some higher power that I could rely on. But, like, through the conversations, I feel like you can get that sense so that when Connie makes that suggestion, it feels like, oh, good job, Connie, on, like, reading the situation and, like, coming up with a plan. And, like, actually doing something for the good of a person and for the other people at this halfway house. Like, the fact that Jim's whole thing was like, you know, I talked about all of this action, but in fact the actions we took just made things worse, is a nice contrast to Connie being like, okay, let me take action in a way that will be positive.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's the problem with this episode, is it kind of works sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
The message is just so muddled that I am so frustrated by it. And it feels like it's not coming out of a place of, like,
Level-headedness.
genuinely wanting... Right. It doesn't feel like it's coming at it from this place of, like, yeah, you know, let's talk about drugs or whatever. It feels like it's coming at this place of, like, we hate the 60s. Here's why. We're only going to tell you about the bad stuff and just acknowledge that, yeah, maybe there was some good stuff. And the point isn't that the 60s are bad, but it is. Like, it's just... Yeah. It winds up being a frustrating episode that falls short, but I don't know...
No, it's set up to fail because it's built around a generalization, and then you get into character analysis.
It just has a
and that's
bad
the whole
premise.
point, is that imagining people and lives complexly does not stand up to generalization. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Especially not in a 20-minute narrative radio show.
Exactly.
I feel like if this was a double or a triple, they could have got a bit more nuance here, but...
Yeah, maybe.
60-something, part 2.
Yeah.
Coming
put that out. Yeah.
On the OA Club.
No, I want... We need 90s something.
Ooh.
Because it's been 30 years, Focus.
Ooh.
I'm ready.
Let's condemn the 90s.
Don't romanticize Tamagotchi.
The internet has destroyed everything.
Everybody is addicted to porn and Pokemon is from the devil.
Our business model is crashing. Help!
There are just too many creative voices now that the internet has leveled the playing field. Now that anybody can make a podcast, what's the point of our show?
For our podcast.
We got him.
We will solely keep them employed.
Yeah, that's what I really want. Is I want the Wad Fam Chalk Pod to be the reason that Focus on the Family continues to exist as a company. That's my goal in life.
Yeah, no.
That'd be pretty hilarious if you get there, though. It'd be really funny.
If we get there, Andrew,
fell.
we quit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the retire on top situation.
Oh, man. Anybody else got closing thoughts for this thing?
Oh, I'm thought it out.
Yeah, I'm about tapped on my commentary for 60-something.
Well, thank you for coming in and talking about it, Nathan. When Andrew and I were throwing around episodes we could do, we were like, I mean, if we talk about 60-something, that's the Nathan episode, right?
Yeah, I can't imagine where you got that idea of me from, but I'm glad you did. This was fun, and this really raised my dander for a while. I was not happy after listening to this episode.
Do you know how much it takes to raise Nathan's dander?
Yeah. Well, not much these days, actually.
No.
My patience is wearing thinner by the day, but...
The world is kind of falling apart. Rest in peace.
Yeah.
Buddy, anything you wanna plug?
Oh, good heavens. Follow me on Spotify. Yay.
Okay. Do you have a name on Spotify or a handle,
Nathan
or?
Haverstick. It is all lowercase, all one word.
Solid. And there will be a link in our description for you to go do that. If they go there, will they find any 60s music?
If they dig,
If you dig.
You won't be digging too far. You might need like a plastic spoon to find it. But.
Oh man. All right. Well, thank you for doing this with us, and thank you all for listening. And Andrew and I are going to be back in a week to cover something new and exciting. And I don't know, are we talking about it now, Andrew? Or
Yeah,
are they
no,
just
we
gonna
do
have
it.
to tune
I say
in?
we drop it. Let's do it.
Wait, is this information that I don't have already? Am I the audience surrogate here?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll react appropriately.
So, Dylan.
So, starting next week, continuing basically through the rest of the year, we are going to be covering the Rydell saga.
Whoa!
Wow.
Now Nathan doesn't know what that means, but
Neither does
an
Andrew.
avid listener might.
So this is the most recent Adventures in Odyssey, like years-long project. I don't know. With a common thread, it just wrapped up in August, or July maybe. The episodes will be airing. Final episodes will be airing on the radio this fall. Although we do have it from some sources that there's one more in the work, but it seems like it's just gonna kind of be an extra episode. So we do know about that. Don't add us about that one, but we will be jumping in next week with the first episode of the Rydell saga, episode 802, Parker for President. So come along with us on that ride. Tell your friends. Andrew and I have genuinely no idea what to expect.
Yeah, this is gonna be nuts.
But we have barely touched New Odyssey, and I, for one, am really looking forward to getting way too deep into the analysis of this show.
Yeah, let's get it. I'm excited. A new saga for us to cover.
Oh boy. So, with that, we will see you in a week here to talk about episode 802, Parker for President. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye. Wadfam Chalk Pod is a presentation of the Lidditz Podcast Co-op. This show is a fan podcast and has no official affiliation with Adventures in Odyssey or Focus on the Family. As such, the copyright is ours under Creative Commons. Follow the podcast at wadfamchalkpod on Twitter and Instagram, or email us at wadfamchalkpod@gmail.com. 60-Something was hosted by Dylan Weaver and Andrew Sabo, with special guest Nathan Haverstick. It was edited by Dylan Weaver. And I'm Nathan Haverstick, hoping you'll join us again next time for more of the Wadfam Chalk Pod.